In the quiet hours of evening, when the world begins to settle and the mind searches for rest, there is something profoundly calming about returning to ancient questions, questions that have accompanied humanity through countless generations, questions that ask not what we must do tomorrow or what we failed to do today, but simply what it means to live, what it means to be human, what it means to find purpose in the brief time we have been given. These are not urgent questions, demanding immediate answers, but gentle companions for reflection, and among all the philosophers who have walked the earth, few have approached these questions with the quiet, systematic care of Aristotle, a student of Plato, a teacher of Alexander, a man who lived more than 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, yet whose thoughts about purpose and meaning seem to speak across the centuries with a voice that is patient, observing, never commanding, always inviting us to consider, to examine, to understand the shape of a well-lived life. Aristotle was born in Stagira, a small town in northern Greece, in the year 384 before the Common Era, and his life unfolded in a world very different from ours, a world without electric light or modern medicine, without the rush of notifications or the weight of endless information. Yet it was also a world where human beings asked the same fundamental questions we ask now, in the darkness before sleep, in the quiet moments, between tasks, in the spaces where the mind wonders whether the life being lived is the life worth living. His father was a physician to the Macedonian court, and perhaps this early exposure to the careful observation of bodies, the attention to detail required in the healing arts, shaped the way Aristotle would later approach philosophy, not as abstract speculation alone, but as careful observation of how things actually are, how humans actually live, what actually constitutes a good life, not in theory but in practice, in the daily unfolding of choices and actions and habits. At the age of 17, Aristotle traveled to Athens, the great center of learning and culture, and there he entered Plato's academy, the school where the greatest minds gathered to discuss justice and beauty and truth and the nature of reality itself. For 20 years, Aristotle remained at the academy, first as a student, then as a teacher, absorbing the teachings of Plato, engaging with ideas about eternal forms and the immortal soul, about the difference between the changing world of appearances and the unchanging world of true reality. Yet, even as he learned from Plato, Aristotle's mind was moving in a different direction, toward the particular rather than the universal, toward the observable rather than the purely abstract, toward the question of how we should live here, in this world, in these bodies, with these limitations and possibilities, rather than focusing solely on some perfect realm beyond our reach. When Plato died, Aristotle left Athens and spent years traveling, observing, teaching, studying the natural world with the same care he brought to questions of ethics and politics and metaphysics. He examined marine life along the coast, collected specimens, made detailed notes about the behavior of animals and the structures of plants, and this habit of careful observation, this patient attention to how things actually function in the world, would become central to his approach to philosophy. For Aristotle, philosophy was not about escaping the world, but about understanding it more deeply, not about denying our human nature, but about fulfilling it, about discovering what it means to flourish as the specific kind of being that we are, rational animals living in communities, capable of choice, capable of virtue, capable of finding meaning, not in some distant perfection, but in the living of each day with care and purpose and attention. Eventually, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school, the Lyceum, where he would walk along covered pathways with his students, discussing philosophy in a conversational manner, covering every subject from logic to biology, from poetry to politics, from ethics to metaphysics, always with the same systematic approach, the same careful distinctions, the same desire to understand things as they truly are. It is said that he wrote extensively, hundreds of works on every imaginable topic, though most of what we have today are not polished writings for public reading, but lecture notes, texts compiled by his students, dense and sometimes difficult, yet filled with insights that have shaped Western thought for over 2 millennia. Insights about virtue and happiness, about purpose and the good life, about what it means to be human, and how we might live in accordance with our deepest nature. Among all of Aristotle's works, none speaks more directly to the question of purpose and meaning than his Nicomachean Ethics, a book named perhaps for his son Nicomachus, or perhaps compiled by his son after his death. A book that begins with a simple observation that every action we take, every choice we make, seems to aim at some good, some end we consider valuable. We eat because we seek nourishment. We work because we seek income or accomplishment. We spend time with friends because we seek companionship or joy. And each of these goods might serve some further good. We seek nourishment so we can have energy. We seek energy so we can accomplish tasks. We seek to accomplish tasks so we can feel useful or secure or fulfilled. And the question Aristotle asks, gently, patiently, is whether there is some final good, some ultimate end that we seek for its own sake and not for the sake of anything beyond it, some purpose that gives meaning to all the other pursuits, some answer to the question of what human life is ultimately for. This question is not asked with urgency or pressure. It is not a demand that requires an immediate answer before you can rest, but rather an invitation to consider as you lie in the darkness, as your breathing slows and deepens, as the day's concerns begin to fade. What is it that you truly seek, not in any single moment or task, but across the whole arc of a life? What is the good that makes all the striving worthwhile? What is the purpose that brings coherence to the scattered activities and choices that fill your days? Aristotle suggests, almost conversationally, almost as if thinking aloud, that most people, if asked what they ultimately seek, would answer with a single word: happiness. We want to be happy. We want our lives to go well. We want to flourish. And everything else we do, all the work and effort and planning and hoping, is ultimately in service of this basic human desire for a life that feels good, that feels meaningful, that feels worth living. Yet happiness, Aristotle observes, is a word that means different things to different people, and even the same person might define happiness differently at different stages of life. A young person might think happiness is pleasure, the enjoyment of physical sensations, good food and drink, romantic love, the thrill of new experiences, the satisfaction of desires. Another person might think happiness is honor, being respected and admired by others, achieving recognition, making a name for oneself, being remembered and valued by the community. Someone else might think happiness is wealth, having enough money to be secure, to afford comfort, to provide for loved ones, to have the freedom that comes with financial stability. And a philosopher might think happiness is knowledge, understanding the truth about the world, contemplating eternal ideas, exercising the mind in pursuit of wisdom. All of these, Aristotle suggests, contain some element of what happiness means, yet none of them quite captures the fullness of what he is pointing toward, the deep and complete flourishing that constitutes a genuinely good human life. The Greek word Aristotle uses is eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness, but the translation does not quite do justice to the richness of the concept. Eudaimonia is not simply a feeling of pleasure or contentment, not simply a moment of joy or satisfaction, but but something more like flourishing, thriving, living well in the fullest sense, the way a plant flourishes when it receives the right amount of sunlight and water and nutrients, the way an animal thrives when it lives according to its nature in a suitable environment, the way a craftsman flourishes when exercising skill in creating something beautiful and functional. Eudaimonia is the state of a human life that is functioning well, realizing its potential, fulfilling its purpose, and the question that occupies Aristotle throughout. The ethics is, what does it mean for a human being to flourish? What is the good life for creatures like us? And how do we achieve it? Not through luck or accident, but through our own choices and actions, and the cultivation of character. To answer this question, Aristotle suggests we must first understand what kind of being a human is, what is distinctive about us, what function or purpose defines our nature. Every living thing, he observes, has some characteristic activity that defines what it is and what it means for it to flourish. The function of an eye is to see, and a good eye is one that sees well, clearly, accurately. The function of a knife is to cut, and a good knife is one that cuts cleanly and efficiently. The function of a musician is to make music, and a good musician is one who performs skillfully, creating beauty through sound. In each case, the good of a thing is determined by how well it performs its characteristic function, and if we can identify the characteristic function of a human being, then we can understand what it means for a human being to be good, to flourish, to achieve eudaimonia. What, then, is the function of a human being? It cannot be simply living, because plants live and grow and reproduce. Yet we would not say that a human life is complete if it merely sustains biological existence. It cannot be simply sensation and movement, because animals sense and move and respond to their environment. Yet we recognize that human life involves something more than animal vitality. What distinguishes humans, Aristotle suggests, is rationality, the capacity to think, to reason, to make choices based on understanding rather than mere instinct or impulse. We are rational animals, beings who can deliberate about what to do, reflect on our actions, consider different possibilities, guide our lives according to principles and purposes we have consciously adopted. This capacity for rational thought is what makes us human, and therefore the good life for a human being must involve the exercise of reason, the activity of the soul in accordance with rationality, the living of a life guided by thoughtfulness and wisdom and understanding. But reason, for Aristotle, is not something cold or purely abstract, separate from emotion and desire and the body. Human rationality is embedded in our complete nature as living, feeling, social beings, and living rationally means not suppressing our emotions but ordering them appropriately, not denying our desires but directing them toward genuine goods, not isolating ourselves in pure thought but engaging with others in communities where we can practice virtue and friendship and contribute to the common good. The good life is not the life of a detached intellect contemplating eternal truths in isolation, though contemplation has its place, but the life of a whole human being functioning well in all aspects, emotional, social, practical, intellectual, a life where reason guides but does not eliminate the richness of human experience, where thought and feeling work together in harmony, where we are neither driven by passion without understanding nor trapped in understanding without feeling. This brings us to one of Aristotle's central insights about the good life. Eudaimonia is not a momentary state, but an activity extended over a complete life. You cannot be happy in the full sense for just a moment or a day, any more than one swallow makes a spring or one sunny day makes a summer. Flourishing is something that happens over time, through the consistent exercise of our capacities in accordance with virtue, through the building of character that allows us to respond well to life's challenges and opportunities, through the development of habits that make good action natural and easy rather than forced or struggled for. The good life is not something that happens to you, not a gift of fortune or a stroke of luck, though external goods like health and moderate wealth and friends certainly help, but something you achieve through your own choices and efforts, through the cultivation of excellence in thought and action, through becoming the kind of person who acts well consistently, not just occasionally. And what does it mean to act well, to live in accordance with virtue? For Aristotle, virtue is not following a set of rigid rules or obeying commandments handed down from on high, but rather developing a character that reliably chooses the right action in the right way, at the right time, for the right reason. Virtue is a state of character, a settled disposition to feel and act appropriately in various situations. And it is acquired not through abstract reasoning alone, but through practice, through repeatedly performing good actions until they become second nature, until we become the kind of person for whom acting well is natural and pleasurable, rather than difficult and forced. Just as we become builders by building, musicians by making music, and skilled craftspeople by practicing our craft, so we become just by doing just actions, brave by doing brave actions, temperate by exercising self-control, and gradually, through this practice, we develop a character that makes virtue easy and vice difficult. The virtues that Aristotle describes are not exotic or superhuman qualities, but the excellences that any thoughtful person would recognize as admirable and necessary for living well in community with others. Courage, the ability to face danger and difficulty without being paralyzed by fear or driven to recklessness. Temperance, the capacity to enjoy pleasures in moderation without being enslaved to appetite or denying all enjoyment. Generosity, the willingness to give and share resources appropriately without being either wasteful or stingy. Honesty, the habit of speaking truthfully without being either boastful or falsely modest. Good temper, the ability to feel anger when appropriate but not to be consumed by rage or to never stand up for what matters. Friendliness, the social ease that allows warm and genuine interaction without being either obsequious or hostile. Justice, the disposition to give others their due and to contribute fairly to the common good. Practical wisdom, the capacity to deliberate well about what to do in particular situations, to see what the situation requires and to act accordingly. Each of these virtues represents a kind of mean, a middle path between two extremes, excess and deficiency, too much and too little. Courage is the mean between cowardice, which feels too much fear, and recklessness, which feels too little. Temperance is the mean between self-indulgence, which gives in to every desire, and insensibility, which denies all pleasure. Generosity is the mean between wastefulness and stinginess. This idea of the mean is not about mathematical precision or finding some exact middle point, but about responding appropriately to each situation with the right amount of feeling and action, neither too much nor too little, but what fits the circumstances and promotes genuine flourishing. The mean is relative to us, to our particular nature and situation, and finding it requires judgment and experience and practical wisdom, the ability to see what is called for here, now, with these people, in this context. Consider courage, for example, one of the virtues Aristotle examines carefully. The courageous person is not someone who never feels fear, for fear is a natural and often appropriate response to genuine danger, a response that protects us and alerts us to threats. nor is the courageous person someone who feels no fear at all and rushes into danger heedlessly, for that is not courage, but recklessness, a failure to properly recognize risk and value one's own life. True courage is the disposition to feel fear when there is something genuinely fearful, but to act well despite that fear, to face danger when it is right to do so, for the right reasons, in the right way, neither fleeing when one should stand firm, nor standing firm when wisdom counsels retreat. The courageous person fears the right things, fears them to the right degree, and acts appropriately in response to that fear, maintaining composure and doing what needs to be done even when afraid. This understanding of courage applies not only to dramatic situations like battle or physical danger, but to the quieter challenges of everyday life. The courage to speak honestly when lying would be easier. The courage to make difficult decisions when avoiding them would be more comfortable. The courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves or our circumstances rather than hiding in denial or distraction. The courage to pursue what truly matters even when it requires effort and sacrifice. The courage to be vulnerable in relationships, to risk rejection in pursuit of genuine connection, to stand by our convictions when others disagree. In all these situations, courage is the middle path between being paralyzed by fear and being reckless in its absence. And developing courage means practicing these acts of appropriate bravery until they become part of who we are, until facing difficulty with steadiness becomes our character rather than an occasional achievement. Or consider temperance, the virtue concerned with physical pleasures, particularly the pleasures of food and drink and sex, though it extends to all forms of bodily enjoyment. The temperate person is not someone who denies all pleasure or views the body and its desires as shameful, for Aristotle is not advocating asceticism or the rejection of physical life. We are embodied creatures, and pleasure is a natural and good part of human existence, a sign that we are engaging with activities that support our flourishing, eating when hungry, drinking when thirsty, experiencing the warmth of physical affection and intimacy. But pleasure can also lead us astray when we pursue it excessively or inappropriately. When we eat beyond what is healthy, drink to the point of losing rational control, pursue sexual pleasure without regard for relationship or commitment or the good of others involved. The self-indulgent person is enslaved to pleasure, organizing life around the pursuit of bodily enjoyment, unable to resist temptation, constantly seeking more intense or varied pleasures, never satisfied, always craving. The temperate person, by contrast, enjoys pleasures in the right measure, at the right times, in the right contexts, finding satisfaction in simple and healthy enjoyments without needing constant stimulation or excess. Temperance is not the grim denial of joy, but the ordered appreciation of it, the ability to enjoy a good meal without overeating, to appreciate wine without drunkenness, to experience physical intimacy within relationships of genuine care and commitment. The temperate person is free from slavery to desire, able to say no to pleasure when it would be harmful or inappropriate, able to delay gratification when that serves larger purposes, able to find contentment in moderation rather than always seeking more. And this virtue, like all virtues, is developed through practice, through choosing the moderate course repeatedly until it becomes natural, until we no longer struggle against desire, but have shaped our desires themselves to align with what is truly good. Similarly with generosity, the virtue concerned with giving and receiving material goods, particularly money, but also other resources and help. The generous person gives gladly and appropriately, not out of a sense of obligation or to gain recognition, but because giving is part of living well, part of being in community with others, part of recognizing that we have enough and can share with those who need. The generous person gives to the right people, for the right reasons, in the right amounts, neither giving so much that they harm themselves and their own ability to live well, nor giving so little that the gift is meaningless or fails to help. Generosity is the mean between wastefulness, which gives without judgment or limit, squandering resources on unworthy causes, or giving beyond one's means, and stinginess, which hoards resources, values accumulation above all else, and finds it painful to share, even when sharing would cost little and help much. What makes generosity a virtue is not simply the external action of giving, but the internal disposition from which it flows. The character of someone who values things rightly, who sees money and possessions as tools for living well rather than as ends in themselves, who takes pleasure in helping others and contributing to the common good, who is neither anxious about giving nor proud of it, but simply gives as a natural expression of a well-ordered soul. The generous person is free from the tyranny of possessions, unburdened by the constant anxiety of accumulation and protection, able to enjoy resources without clinging to them, able to share without resentment, able to receive from others without feeling diminished, recognizing that generosity flows in all directions and that we are all at times both givers and receivers in the intricate web of human interdependence. And so it is with all the virtues, each one a form of excellence in some aspect of human life, each one a mean between extremes, each one developed through practice and habituation, each one contributing to the overall harmony and flourishing of a life well lived. Aristotle's catalogue of virtues is not meant to be exhaustive or final, but representative, showing the kinds of excellences that characterize good human functioning across the various domains where we make choices and take actions. Some virtues concern our relationship to physical pleasures and pains, like temperance and courage. Some concern our use of resources, like generosity and magnificence. Some concern our relationships with others, like friendliness and truthfulness and wit. Some concern our emotional responses, like good temper and pride rightly understood, and overarching all of them is practical wisdom, the intellectual virtue that allows us to see what each situation requires and to choose the appropriate action, the mean relative to us in this particular context. Practical wisdom, which Aristotle calls phronesis, is the capacity for good deliberation about what is good and beneficial for living well, not in some narrow sense like health or wealth, but in the full sense of eudaimonia, complete human flourishing. The practically wise person is able to see situations clearly, to identify what matters, to deliberate well about how to achieve good ends through appropriate means, and to act on that deliberation effectively. Practical wisdom is not the same as scientific knowledge or technical skill, which concern fixed principles and universal truths, but is rather a kind of perceptive intelligence about the contingent and variable circumstances of human life. The ability to navigate the complexity and uncertainty of real situations where there are no simple formulas or guaranteed right answers, where what is required is judgment, discernment, experience, and a well-formed character that can intuit what is fitting and good. This practical wisdom cannot be taught through lectures or books alone, though reflection on principles and examples can help, but must be learned through experience, through actually making choices and seeing their consequences, through observing others who exemplify wisdom, through reflecting on successes and failures, gradually developing the pattern recognition and intuitive grasp that allows the wise person to see what needs to be done almost immediately, without lengthy deliberation, the way a skilled craftsperson sees how to approach a task, or an experienced physician diagnoses an illness. Practical wisdom grows with time and practice, which is why Aristotle notes that while young people can be skilled in mathematics or music, they rarely possess practical wisdom, for wisdom requires the kind of experiential knowledge that only comes from living, from encountering many situations, from making mistakes and learning from them, from seeing how different choices lead to different outcomes, from developing the settled character that makes good judgment natural. Moreover, practical wisdom and moral virtue are deeply interconnected, each requiring the other. You cannot be truly virtuous without practical wisdom, because virtue requires choosing the right action in the right way for the right reason, and knowing what the right action is requires the perceptive intelligence of practical wisdom. A person might perform outwardly good actions from habit or training, but without understanding why they are good or what makes them appropriate to the situation, they lack the full virtue that Aristotle describes. Conversely, you cannot have practical wisdom without moral virtue, because practical wisdom requires having the right ends, desiring what is truly good, and that requires a character formed by the moral virtues. A clever person might be skilled at figuring out how to achieve their goals, but if their goals are bad, if they desire the wrong things, then they lack true practical wisdom, for practical wisdom is precisely the capacity to deliberate well about what is genuinely good for human flourishing. This deep connection between wisdom and virtue points to something central in Aristotle's understanding of the good life. Flourishing is not primarily about doing the right things mechanically or following rules correctly, but about becoming the right kind of person, someone whose character is so well formed that good action flows naturally from who they are. The goal is not just right action, but right action from a stable and settled disposition, not just avoiding vice, but developing virtue, not just knowing what is good, but loving it, desiring it, finding pleasure in it. The fully virtuous person does not experience virtue as a burden or a struggle, as if they constantly have to fight against their inclinations to do what is right, but rather finds that virtue has become part of their nature, that acting justly or courageously or temperately is what they want to do, what feels natural and satisfying, what aligns with their deepest sense of who they are. This is why Aristotle emphasizes that virtue is a kind of second nature, developed through habituation, through repeated practice of good actions until they become easy and pleasurable. Just as musicians practice scales and exercises until playing becomes fluid and natural, just as athletes train their bodies until complex movements become automatic, so we train our characters through repeated moral actions until virtue becomes our disposition, our settled way of being in the world. At first, acting virtuously might require effort and self-control. We might have to force ourselves to be generous when we would rather hoard, to be courageous when we would rather flee, to be temperate when we would rather indulge. But gradually, through practice, these actions become easier, more natural, more pleasurable, until eventually we reach a state where we are generous, because we are the kind of person who delights in giving, courageous, because we are the kind of person who faces difficulty with steady resolve, temperate, because we are the kind of person who finds satisfaction in moderation. This transformation of character through habituation is not a mechanical process, but a deeply human one, involving not just behavior, but emotion and thought and desire. As we practice virtue, our feelings begin to align with our actions. We start to feel pleasure in what is truly good and pain at what is truly bad. Our desires reorder themselves, our perceptions sharpen. We see situations more clearly, understand what is at stake, care about the right things. The virtuous person is not someone who has conquered or eliminated emotion, but someone whose emotions have been educated, refined, brought into harmony with reason, so that feeling and thinking work together rather than pulling in opposite directions. When we see someone suffering unjustly, we feel the anger that moves us to defend them, but not the rage that would make us act cruelly or disproportionately. When we face danger for a worthy cause, we feel fear, but not the paralyzing terror that would make us flee. When we enjoy a good meal or pleasant company, we feel pleasure, but not the insatiable craving that would drive us to excess. This education of emotion, this harmonization of feeling and reason, is central to what it means to flourish as a human being, because we are not purely rational creatures who can simply decide what is right and then do it regardless of how we feel, nor are we purely emotional creatures driven entirely by passion and appetite. We are rational animals, beings in whom reason and emotion are intertwined, and living well means achieving a kind of inner harmony where our rational understanding of what is good and our emotional responses to the world are aligned, where we love what is truly lovable, fear what is truly fearful, enjoy what is truly enjoyable, desire what is truly desirable. This harmony is not achieved through the suppression of emotion by reason, as if reason were a tyrant ruling over rebellious subjects, but through the education of emotion by reason, a gradual process in which our feelings themselves become more intelligent, more perceptive, more attuned to reality and to genuine value. Consider what this means in practice, in the living of an ordinary day, in the small choices and responses that make up a human life. You wake in the morning, and before you even think about it consciously, you feel a certain way about the day ahead, perhaps eager and energized, or perhaps reluctant and heavy. These feelings are not arbitrary, but reflect your character, your habits of thought and emotion, your sense of what matters and what is worth doing. The person of good character feels drawn toward the day's activities because they involve things worth caring about, work that contributes to something meaningful, relationships that matter, practices of virtue and growth. They do not need to force themselves out of bed through sheer willpower, but find that their desires naturally align with what is good, that they want to engage with life because life, when lived well, is inherently engaging and worthwhile. Throughout the day, you encounter situations that call for response, a colleague who needs help, a temptation to take a shortcut that would compromise quality, a moment of frustration when things do not go as planned, an opportunity to share something with someone in need, a choice between what is easy and what is right. In each moment, your character determines how you respond, not through conscious deliberation every time, but through the settled dispositions you have developed. The generous person sees the need and feels moved to help without calculating whether it is worth the cost. The honest person speaks truthfully without considering whether a lie might be more advantageous. The temperate person declines the excessive indulgence without experiencing it as a sacrifice. The courageous person faces the difficult situation without being consumed by anxiety. These responses are not forced or artificial, but natural expressions of who the person has become through years of practice and habituation. In the evening, you reflect on the day, perhaps before sleep, in the quiet darkness where the mind reviews what has happened. For the person of virtuous character, this reflection brings a kind of satisfaction, not the pride that compares oneself favorably to others or congratulates oneself on superiority, but the quiet contentment of knowing that you have lived according to your values, that your actions expressed your character, that you moved through the day with integrity and care, that you were, in the moments that mattered, the person you aspire to be. This is not a contentment that depends on everything going well externally, on achieving all your goals, or receiving recognition, or avoiding all difficulty, but a contentment that comes from inner alignment, from the harmony between who you are and how you act, from the sense that you are living authentically, in accordance with your nature as a rational and social being capable of virtue. And over time, over months and years, this pattern of virtuous action and right feeling and practical wisdom builds into something larger, into a life that has shape and meaning and direction, a life oriented toward genuine flourishing, toward eudaimonia. This is not a life free from suffering or difficulty or loss, for Aristotle is not naive about the reality of misfortune and the limits of human control. Even the virtuous person can face tragedy, can lose loved ones, can suffer illness or poverty or political upheaval, can encounter circumstances that make flourishing difficult or even impossible. External goods matter, Aristotle acknowledges. We cannot flourish without at least a basic level of health, security, resources, and meaningful relationships. For we are not pure souls, but embodied social creatures whose well-being depends partly on conditions beyond our control. Yet even granting the importance of external circumstances, Aristotle maintains that virtue is the central component of the good life, the element most within our control and most constitutive of flourishing. A person with excellent character will live well even in difficult circumstances, will respond to misfortune with courage and wisdom, will maintain dignity and integrity even in suffering, will find meaning and purpose even when external conditions are far from ideal. Conversely, a person of poor character will fail to flourish even if externally fortunate, will be corrupted by wealth or power, will be enslaved to pleasure or ambition, will lack the inner resources to find satisfaction or meaning, will live a life that is hollow and unsatisfying despite its outward success. The virtuous person is not invulnerable to harm, but virtue makes us resilient, enables us to endure what must be endured, and to maintain our humanity and dignity even in the face of loss and suffering. This resilience, this ability to live well even under difficult circumstances, comes from having developed a character that is stable and strong, rooted in something deeper than external conditions, oriented toward goods that cannot be simply taken away. The virtuous person's happiness depends primarily on their own character and choices, on things within their power, rather than on the vagaries of fortune. They cannot control whether they will be healthy or sick, wealthy or poor, honored or despised by others, successful or thwarted in their external aims, but they can control whether they face these circumstances with courage or cowardice, respond to them with wisdom or foolishness, maintain justice and generosity and temperance regardless of what fortune brings. And because their happiness rests primarily on these internal goods, on the exercise of virtue and the possession of practical wisdom, they are less vulnerable to the ups and downs of external fortune, more stable in their sense of meaning and purpose, more capable of maintaining equanimity and contentment across the variable conditions of life. Yet Aristotle's emphasis on virtue and character does not mean that we should be indifferent to external circumstances, or that we should not work to improve our material conditions and social arrangements. On the contrary, because human flourishing requires certain external goods, because we cannot fully develop and exercise virtue without health and resources and political community and friendship, we have reason to care deeply about creating conditions that enable flourishing, both for ourselves and for others. This is why Aristotle devotes so much attention to politics, to the question of how communities should be organized to promote the good life for their citizens. The The polis, the city-state, exists not merely for the sake of survival or mutual protection, but for the sake of living well, for enabling its citizens to develop virtue and to flourish as human beings. A good political community, Aristotle argues, is one that educates its citizens in virtue, that provides the material conditions necessary for flourishing, that offers opportunities for meaningful participation in shared governance, that honors excellence and promotes justice, that enables friendships and associations through which people can practice virtue and find meaning. The laws and institutions of the community shape character, encouraging some ways of life and discouraging others, making certain forms of excellence easier to achieve and certain forms of vice more difficult to fall into. This is why political philosophy is, for Aristotle, inseparable from ethics, why the question of how we should live individually cannot be separated from the question of how we should structure our life together in communities, why personal virtue and social justice are intertwined aspects of the same larger project of human flourishing. Friendship, too, is essential to the good life, and Aristotle devotes considerable attention to exploring the nature and importance of friendship in the Ethics. We are social creatures, he observes, not made to live in isolation, but to share our lives with others, to communicate, to cooperate, to care for one another. Even someone who possessed all other goods, wealth and health and honor and power, would not choose to live without friends, for life without friendship would be empty and meaningless, lacking the shared activities and mutual affection that make human existence rich and full. Friendship is not an optional add-on to the good life, but a constitutive element of it, one of the primary arenas in which we exercise virtue, experience joy, find meaning and purpose. Aristotle distinguishes between different kinds of friendship. Friendships based on utility, where people associate because they are useful to each other. Friendships based on pleasure, where people associate because they enjoy each other's company. And friendships based on virtue, where people love each other for who they are, for their character and goodness, and wish each other well for each other's sake. The first two kinds of friendship are incomplete and fragile, lasting only as long as the utility or pleasure lasts, dissolving when circumstances change and the basis for the association disappears. But friendship based on virtue is complete and enduring, for it is based on something stable, the character of the friends themselves, and it involves genuine mutual care, each friend wishing good for the other, not as a means to their own benefit, but as an end in itself, loving the friend for who they are rather than for what they provide. Such friendships are rare and require time and intimacy to develop, for you cannot truly know another person's character quickly or superficially, cannot build the trust and mutual understanding that characterize true friendship without sustained interaction and shared experience. True friends share life together, spend time in each other's company, engage in activities that express and develop their virtues, communicate openly and honestly, support each other in difficulty, celebrate each other's successes, help each other grow in excellence and wisdom. In the presence of a true friend, we are seen and known and accepted, not for our achievements or status, but for who we fundamentally are. And this recognition and acceptance is profoundly fulfilling, meeting a deep human need for connection and understanding. Moreover, friendship is itself a kind of activity in which we exercise virtue and find pleasure, and in this sense it contributes directly to eudaimonia, to flourishing. The activities we share with friends, conversation, shared meals, collaborative projects, mutual support in times of difficulty, celebration in times of joy, all of. These are arenas for the exercise of virtues like generosity and honesty and loyalty and practical wisdom. Friendship makes us better people, both because friends encourage and challenge each other to live up to their best selves, and because the presence of someone we love and respect gives us additional motivation to act virtuously, to be worthy of the friendship, to maintain the trust and affection that sustains the relationship. And friendship brings a distinctive kind of pleasure. The joy of shared activity with someone you care about, the delight of being understood and appreciated, the comfort of knowing you are not alone in facing life's challenges. In all these ways, friendship is integral to the good life, and a life without friends, no matter how virtuous in other respects, would be incomplete and impoverished. This is why Aristotle says that no one would choose to live without friends, even if they had all other goods. For human beings are political and social by nature, and our flourishing inherently involves relationship, communication, shared life with others whom we love and who love us in return. The image of the completely self-sufficient individual, needing no one, depending on nothing outside themselves, is not for Aristotle an image of human excellence, but of something less than fully human, a denial of our nature as beings who achieve our fullest flourishing in relationship and community. And yet, there is also a place in the good life for solitude, for contemplation, for the exercise of the mind in theoretical understanding, and in the final book of the Ethics, Aristotle explores what he calls the contemplative life, the life devoted to philosophical and scientific inquiry, to understanding the fundamental nature of reality, to thinking about eternal and unchanging truths. This contemplative activity, he suggests, is in some sense the highest form of human functioning, the exercise of what is most divine in us, our capacity for theoretical reason, our ability to grasp universal principles and necessary truths, to understand the cosmos and our place in it, to think about thought itself. Contemplation is an activity that is self-sufficient, pursued for its own sake, rather than for any external benefit, and it brings a pure and lasting pleasure, the joy of understanding, of insight, of seeing clearly into the nature of things. The life devoted primarily to contemplation would be, in a sense, more than human, for it would require a degree of leisure and freedom from practical concerns that few can achieve, and it would involve identifying with the divine element in us, our rational soul, rather than with our complete embodied social nature. Yet to the extent that we can engage in contemplation, to the extent that we can set aside time for study and reflection and the pursuit of understanding, we are exercising the highest human capacity and participating in an activity that most fully expresses what is distinctive and excellent about human nature, even if the fully contemplative life is not possible or even desirable for most people who must attend to the practical demands of family and work and citizenship. Still, the integration of contemplative activity into a life also characterized by practical virtue represents a kind of completeness, a flourishing that includes both the active exercise of moral virtue in social and political contexts and the more solitary exercise of intellectual virtue in study and reflection. This tension or balance between the active and contemplative dimensions of human life has been the subject of much discussion and interpretation in the Aristotelian tradition. Some readers emphasize the primacy of contemplation, seeing it as the truest form of happiness, and the other virtues as merely instrumental or preparatory. Others emphasize the primacy of practical virtue and political engagement, seeing contemplation as a valuable but limited activity that cannot constitute a complete human life. Perhaps the most satisfying reading is one that sees both dimensions as essential, as complementary aspects of flourishing, each valuable in its own way, each contributing to the richness and fullness of a well-lived life. We are both practical and theoretical beings, both social and capable of solitude, both engaged in the changing world of action and capable of grasping unchanging truths, and the good life includes both the active exercise of moral virtue in relationship and community and the quieter exercise of intellectual virtue in study and contemplation. What is clear is that for Aristotle, purpose and meaning in human life come not from any single achievement or status or external condition, but from the ongoing activity of living well, from the exercise of our capacities in accordance with virtue, from the development of a character that enables consistent good action and right feeling, from relationships of genuine friendship and participation in a just political community, from the pursuit of understanding and the cultivation of wisdom. Meaning is not something we find ready-made or receive from outside, but something we create through the choices we make and the character we develop, something that emerges from living in accordance with our nature as rational, social, embodied beings capable of virtue and flourishing. This understanding of purpose and meaning is at once demanding and liberating, humbling and empowering. It is demanding because it requires effort and discipline, the consistent practice of virtue, the formation of good habits, the cultivation of practical wisdom through experience and reflection, the maintenance of friendships and participation in community life, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Flourishing does not happen automatically or by accident, but requires intentionality and care, attention to how we are living and whether our actions express and develop our character in good directions. It requires honesty about our faults and failures, willingness to learn and grow, patience with the slow process of habituation and character formation, perseverance in the face of difficulty and setback. Yet it is also liberating because it locates meaning primarily in things within our control, in our own choices and actions, and the character we develop, rather than in external circumstances and achievements that depend partly on fortune. We cannot control whether we will be wealthy or poor, healthy or sick, honored or despised, successful in our external aims, or thwarted by circumstances beyond our power. But we can control whether we respond to whatever comes with virtue and wisdom, whether we maintain our integrity and dignity, whether we treat others justly and generously, whether we face difficulty with courage and moderation with temperance, whether we continue to grow in understanding and practical wisdom. And because flourishing depends primarily on these things within our control, we have reason for hope and confidence, knowing that the good life is genuinely possible, genuinely achievable, not dependent on being born into the right circumstances or blessed by exceptional fortune, but available to anyone willing to undertake the work of developing their character and living virtuously. It is humbling because it reminds us that we are not gods, not self-sufficient, not in complete control of our lives and destinies, but finite and vulnerable creatures who depend on external goods and social relationships and fortunate circumstances for our flourishing. We cannot guarantee that we will flourish, cannot protect ourselves entirely from misfortune and suffering, cannot achieve the good life through our efforts alone. We need health and resources and friends and political communities. We need time and opportunity and at least moderate fortune. We need others to cooperate with us and support us and care about us. The good life is not a project we complete in isolation, but something we build together in relationship and community, dependent on conditions that are partly beyond our individual control. Yet it is also empowering because it affirms that we are capable of virtue, capable of developing excellent character, capable of making genuine choices about how we will live and who we will become, capable of finding meaning and purpose and satisfaction in the living of a well-ordered life. We are not merely victims of circumstance or slaves to passion or prisoners of fate, but rational beings with the capacity for self-direction, for improvement, for excellence. We can learn from experience, can reflect on our actions and their consequences, can deliberately cultivate habits and dispositions that support flourishing, can become through practice and effort the kind of people who naturally act well and find pleasure in virtue. This capacity for self-formation, this ability to shape our own character and thereby our experience of life, is the ground of human dignity and the source of genuine hope. As we reflect on these ideas in the quiet hours before sleep, in the darkness where thought slows and the day's pressures fade, there is something deeply reassuring about Aristotle's vision of the good life, something that speaks to fundamental human longings for meaning and purpose and flourishing. We do not need extraordinary circumstances or exceptional gifts to live well, do not need to achieve fame or wealth or power, do not need to be perfect or superhuman. We need to develop good character through practice of virtue, to exercise practical wisdom in navigating life's complexities, to maintain friendships and participate in community, to pursue understanding and contemplation to whatever degree our circumstances allow, to find satisfaction in the daily activity of living in accordance with our nature as rational and social beings. This is a vision of the good life that is demanding but achievable, idealistic but realistic, oriented toward excellence but grounded in human nature and the actual conditions of human existence. And there is also something calming about Aristotle's emphasis on the slow process of habituation and character formation, the recognition that virtue is not achieved in a moment, but developed over time through repeated practice, that we become good gradually, through the accumulation of small choices and actions, through the slow reshaping of our desires and emotions, through the patient work of learning to feel and act rightly in various situations. We need not be anxious about perfection or discouraged by current imperfections, but can trust the process, can keep practicing, can recognize that each good action, each exercise of virtue, each moment of practical wisdom contributes to the formation of character and the development of the settled dispositions that make the good life possible. Growth is slow but real. Change is gradual but genuine, and the person we are becoming through our daily choices is the person we will be, not in a fixed and final sense, but as the continuing subject of our own development and the author of our ongoing story. Think for a moment about the practical implications of this understanding for how you approach tomorrow, for how you think about the ordinary moments and choices that make up a day, for how you understand what matters and what is worth caring about. Aristotle invites us to see each day not as a series of isolated moments or tasks, but as an opportunity to exercise virtue, to practice good character, to move toward flourishing through the choices we make and the actions we take. The morning's choice to rise with purpose rather than reluctance, to approach the day's work as meaningful rather than merely obligatory, to treat others with kindness and respect rather than indifference or hostility, to exercise self-control rather than self-indulgence, to speak honestly rather than deceptively, to face difficulty with courage rather than avoidance. Each of these seemingly small choices contributes to character formation, reinforces good habits, shapes the person you are becoming. And throughout the day, as you encounter the situations that call for response, the colleague who irritates you, the task that frustrates you, the pleasure that tempts you, the opportunity to help someone in need, the choice between what is easy and what is right, you can pause and ask yourself what virtue requires here, what the good person would do, what the mean between extremes looks like in this situation, how you can act in a way that expresses and strengthens your character rather than undermining it. This is not a rigid or anxious questioning, but a gentle reminder, a turning of attention to what matters, a reconnection with your values and your sense of who you want to be. And as you practice this kind of mindful virtue, as you make these choices consistently over time, you will find that they become easier, more natural, more pleasurable, that your character is being shaped in good directions, that you are moving toward the kind of settled disposition that characterizes true virtue. In the evening, as you reflect on the day before sleep, you can consider not just what you accomplished or failed to accomplish in external terms, but how you lived, whether your actions expressed your character, whether you moved through the day with integrity and care, whether you were present to the people and situations you encountered, whether you exercised virtue and practical wisdom or fell into vice and foolishness. This reflection is not meant to be harsh or judgmental, not an occasion for self-criticism or regret, but a gentle examination, a taking stock, an opportunity to learn from experience and to recommit to living well. Where you acted virtuously, you can feel satisfaction and allow that satisfaction to reinforce the habit. Where you fell short, you can understand what happened, consider what you might do differently next time, and resolve to practice the virtue you need to develop without dwelling in guilt or shame, but simply recognizing an area for growth and attention. And over time, through this daily practice and reflection, through the slow accumulation of virtuous actions and the gradual formation of good character, you will find that your life has meaning and direction, that you are flourishing in the deep sense Aristotle describes, not because everything is perfect or because you have achieved all your goals, but because you are living well, exercising your capacities in accordance with virtue, experiencing the satisfaction that comes from inner harmony and the alignment of action with character, participating in relationships of genuine friendship and communities of mutual care, growing in wisdom and understanding, finding purpose not in some distant achievement, but in the daily activity of living as the kind of person you aspire to be. This is what Aristotle offers us, a vision of human flourishing that is grounded in our nature, achievable through our efforts, sustained by virtue and wisdom, enriched by friendship and community, and characterized by an ongoing activity of living well rather than a static state of having achieved happiness. It is a vision that requires patience and practice, that unfolds slowly over a lifetime, that involves both active engagement in the world and quiet contemplation of truth, that balances individual development with social participation, that recognizes both our vulnerability to fortune and our capacity for self-determination. And it is a vision that speaks across the centuries, with surprising freshness and relevance, addressing questions that remain central to human experience. Questions about what makes life meaningful, how we should live, what constitutes true flourishing, what it means to be fully human. In these quiet moments before sleep, as the mind settles and the body relaxes, as the concerns of the day recede and thought turns inward, Aristotle's philosophy offers not excitement or urgency, but depth and calm, an invitation to consider what truly matters, to reflect on the shape of a well-lived life, to imagine the kind of person you might become through patient practice of virtue, to recognize that meaning and purpose are not distant goals to be achieved, but present possibilities to be realized in each day's choices and actions, to trust that the slow work of character formation is worthwhile, that the practice of virtue leads to flourishing, that the good life is genuinely possible for beings like us, rational animals capable of excellence, living together in communities, seeking understanding, developing wisdom, caring for one another, finding satisfaction in the exercise of our capacities and the fulfillment of our nature. Let these thoughts accompany you into sleep, not as problems to be solved or tasks to be accomplished, but as gentle companions, quiet reassurances that the life you are living can be meaningful, that the efforts you make toward virtue and wisdom are worthwhile, that flourishing is not an impossible dream, but a real possibility, achievable through patient practice, sustainable through good habits, enriched by friendship and community, grounded in the exercise of your capacities as a rational and social being. Rest in the knowledge that you do not need to be perfect to live well, that growth is gradual and real, that each day offers new opportunities for virtue, that the person you are becoming through your choices is the person you will be, and that this process of becoming, this activity of living well, is itself the meaning and purpose you seek, not something beyond or outside your life, but woven into its very fabric, expressed in each choice to act virtuously, each exercise of practical wisdom, each moment of genuine friendship, each instance of contemplation and understanding. And as sleep approaches, as consciousness begins to fade, and the boundary between waking and dreaming grows soft and permeable, let yourself release the need to grasp, or hold, or fully understand these ideas, allowing them simply to be present, to settle into the background of awareness, to become part of the atmosphere of rest and peace in which you drift towards sleep. Aristotle's voice from across the centuries speaks quietly of flourishing and virtue, of character and wisdom, of friendship and contemplation, of the good life that unfolds slowly through practice and habituation, through the exercise of our capacities and the fulfillment of our nature. And these ancient words offer not instructions or demands, but invitations, possibilities, reassurances that the life you seek is within reach, that meaning is found in living well each day, that purpose emerges from the practice of virtue and the cultivation of wisdom, that you are capable of flourishing, of becoming through patient effort the kind of person who lives well naturally and finds deep satisfaction in the daily activity of being fully human. Sleep comes gradually, gently, as thought becomes diffuse and the body's signals of rest grow stronger, as images replace connected ideas and the logical structure of reflection dissolves into the associative flow of pre-sleep consciousness. And in this transition between waking and sleeping, the mind can hold Aristotle's insights lightly, can sense without analyzing that there is wisdom here about how to live, can feel without articulating that these ancient reflections on purpose and meaning speak to something fundamental and enduring in human experience, can trust without proving that the path of virtue and wisdom leads toward flourishing, toward the good life, toward eudaimonia. The darkness deepens, the room grows quiet, the breath slows and becomes regular, and consciousness continues its gentle descent toward sleep, carrying with it half-formed images of ancient Athens, of philosophers walking in covered pathways, discussing virtue and happiness, of communities organized around the pursuit of the good life, of friends sharing activities that express and develop their character, of individuals practicing virtue until it becomes second nature, of minds engaged in contemplation of eternal truths, of lives that flourish because they are lived in accordance with human nature, exercising reason and virtue, pursuing wisdom, caring for others, finding meaning in the daily activity of living well. And perhaps, as sleep finally arrives, there is a sense barely conscious, more feeling than thought, that something important has been touched upon, some truth about how to live, some understanding of what makes life meaningful, some recognition that purpose is not found in extraordinary achievements or external circumstances, but in the ordinary practice of virtue, in the slow formation of good character, in the exercise of practical wisdom, in relationships of genuine friendship, in participation in community, in moments of contemplation and understanding, in the daily choice to live in accordance with our nature as rational, social, embodied beings, capable of excellence, capable of flourishing, capable of finding deep satisfaction in the activity of living well. Sleep. The mind continues its gentle wandering through themes and images, no longer organizing thoughts into coherent arguments, but allowing ideas to drift and merge and dissolve. Fragments of Aristotelian wisdom floating through consciousness like leaves on a slow-moving stream. Virtue as second nature, the mean between extremes, practical wisdom, seeing what each situation requires, friendship as essential to flourishing, contemplation of eternal truths, the good life as activity in accordance with virtue, eudaimonia as the fulfillment of human nature, character formed through practice and habituation. In sleep's approaching embrace, there is no need to hold on to these ideas, to memorize or master them, to turn them into projects or obligations, but simply to let them be present, to allow their wisdom to settle somewhere deep in consciousness, to trust that something valuable has been encountered, some guidance about how to live, some reassurance about what matters, some ancient voice speaking across centuries with patience and care about purpose and meaning and the possibility of flourishing. And this is enough, more than enough, as sleep arrives and consciousness fades and the long night of rest begins. The breath slows further, becomes almost imperceptible as the body settles completely into rest, and the mind releases its last hold on waking thought, drifting into that space where consciousness dissolves and sleep takes over, where images replace ideas and logic gives way to dream, where the concerns of the day and the reflections on philosophy all recede into a vast, quiet darkness. And in that darkness there is peace, there is rest, there is the profound relaxation that comes when effort ceases and the body and mind are allowed simply to be, without striving, without grasping, without the need to accomplish or understand or achieve anything at all. And through the night, as sleep deepens and dreams come and go, as the body repairs itself and the mind processes the day's experiences, perhaps something of Aristotle's wisdom remains, not as explicit knowledge, but as a kind of subtle orientation, a gentle inclination toward living well, toward practicing virtue, toward caring about what truly matters, toward recognizing that purpose and meaning are found not in distant goals, but in present choices, not in extraordinary circumstances, but in ordinary moments, not in external achievements, but in internal character, not in fleeting pleasures, but in sustained flourishing. And this recognition, even if unconscious, even if only dimly sensed, can shape how tomorrow is approached, how choices are made, how life is lived, moment by moment, choice by choice, gradually becoming through practice the kind of person who flourishes, who lives well, who finds meaning in the daily exercise of virtue and wisdom. The hours of night pass slowly, silently, as the world turns and darkness gradually gives way to the first hints of dawn, and through it all there is rest, deep rest, restorative rest, the kind of rest that comes from letting go, from releasing the need to control or understand or accomplish, from trusting that it is enough simply to be, to exist, to breathe, to sleep, to allow the natural rhythms of the body and the cycles of day and night to carry you along without resistance or anxiety or the pressure of constant doing and achieving and striving. Aristotle would understand this need for rest, this recognition that we are not gods, but finite creatures with bodies that tire and minds that need respite, that flourishing includes not just virtuous activity, but also the restoration that makes such activity possible, that the good life has its own rhythms and cannot be rushed or forced, that wisdom includes knowing when to act and when to rest, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to think and when to simply be. Even the philosopher who emphasized activity and virtue and the exercise of our capacities recognized that we are whole human beings, not just rational souls, and that caring for the body and allowing for sleep and rest and recovery is part of living well, part of respecting our nature, part of the practical wisdom that sees what is needed in each situation. So in these hours of night, in this deep rest, there is no failure or falling short or lack of virtue, but rather the fulfillment of a natural need, the body and mind doing what they are meant to do, restoring themselves, preparing for another day of living and choosing and acting, another opportunity to practice virtue and exercise wisdom and move toward flourishing. Sleep is not opposed to the good life, but part of it, not a waste of time, but a necessary component of human existence, not something to be resented or minimized, but something to be accepted and appreciated as the gift it is, the daily renewal that makes it possible to continue the work of living well, day after day, throughout a lifetime. And as the night continues and sleep remains deep and untroubled, the mind at rest, the body relaxed, the breath steady and slow, there is simply this: the peaceful darkness, the quiet stillness, the profound rest that holds no thought, no striving, no concern, only the pure experience of being at rest, of consciousness dissolved in sleep, of the boundaries between self and world becoming soft and permeable. And in this dissolution, there is a kind of peace that cannot be grasped or held or created through effort, but only received, only allowed, only accepted as the natural state that comes when we finally stop and rest and let ourselves simply be. Hours pass, unmeasured, unmarked, as sleep continues its restorative work, and somewhere in the depths of consciousness, beneath the level of explicit thought or awareness, the themes of Aristotelian philosophy might continue their quiet influence, not as concepts to be mastered, but as part of the background of understanding that shapes how we see the world and ourselves, that inclines us towards certain ways of thinking about what matters and how to live, that provides a framework, however implicit and unarticulated, for making sense of experience and finding meaning in the daily round of activities and choices that constitute a human life. We are, Aristotle would say, the kinds of beings whose good consists in activity in accordance with virtue, in the exercise of our capacities as rational and social creatures, in the development of excellent character through practice and habituation, in the pursuit of wisdom and the maintenance of friendship and the participation in political community. And while these ideas might seem distant or abstract or difficult to grasp, they point towards something we recognize at a deeper level, the sense that life is meaningful when we are living well, when our actions express our values, when we are becoming through our choices the kind of person we aspire to be, when we are connected to others in relationships of genuine care, when we are growing in understanding and wisdom, when we are exercising our capacities and fulfilling our nature rather than denying or suppressing or wasting them. This recognition need not be explicit or conscious to have its effect, need not be articulated in philosophical language to shape our experience, for it operates at a level deeper than words, at the level of basic orientation and fundamental values, at the level where we sense without thinking what kind of life is worth living, what kind of person is worth being, what kind of choices are worth making. And Aristotle's philosophy, when encountered with openness and reflection, when allowed to settle into consciousness rather than being merely studied from the outside, can become part of this deep orientation, can influence how we see and feel and choose, can guide us gently toward virtue and wisdom and flourishing, not through rules or commands, but through the articulation of something we already dimly recognize, the vision of a well-lived human life. As the night reaches its deepest point, as sleep is most profound and dreams most vivid, as the mind wanders through landscapes of memory and imagination, processing and integrating the day's experiences, making connections and finding patterns, preparing for tomorrow's challenges and opportunities, there is a kind of wisdom in this too, a kind of intelligence that operates below the level of conscious thought, that sorts and organizes and makes sense without deliberate effort, that knows what it needs to know and does what it needs to do without being directed or controlled. And this natural wisdom of the sleeping mind reminds us that we are more than our conscious thoughts and deliberate choices, that much of what we are and what we do operates below the surface, in the realm of habit and disposition and character that Aristotle emphasized so strongly. We do not become virtuous by consciously thinking about virtue in every moment, but by developing habits and dispositions that make virtuous action natural and easy, by practicing good choices until they become second nature, by shaping our character through repeated actions until we are the kind of person who naturally responds well to situations without having to deliberate about it every time. And this process of habituation works largely below the level of conscious awareness, shaping our automatic responses, forming our intuitions and perceptions, creating the settled dispositions that constitute character. Sleep and the unconscious processing it enables are part of this larger process of character formation, part of how we integrate experiences and develop patterns of response, part of how practice becomes nature and choice becomes character. So even in sleep, even in unconsciousness, even in the absence of deliberate effort or intentional practice, the work of becoming continues. The slow process of character formation proceeds, influenced by the choices we made while awake, shaped by the experiences we had during the day, incorporating the lessons we learned and the virtues we practiced and the wisdom we exercised. We wake each morning not exactly the same person we were when we fell asleep, but slightly changed, subtly different, shaped by yesterday's choices and experiences, carrying forward the effects of practice and habituation, gradually becoming through this cumulative process the kind of person whose character is settled and whose actions are reliably good. The night begins to fade as the first light of dawn appears on the horizon, though sleep continues for a while longer, growing lighter now, approaching the surface of consciousness, dreams becoming more vivid and memorable, the mind beginning its transition back toward waking. And in this liminal space between sleep and waking, there is a kind of openness, a receptivity to insight and understanding, a capacity to see things freshly, to sense connections and meanings that might be obscured during the full engagement of waking consciousness. Many people report that their best ideas come in these early morning moments, when the mind is rested but not yet fully engaged with the day's demands, when thought is free and associative rather than linear and goal-directed, when the unconscious wisdom of sleep meets the conscious awareness of waking. And perhaps in these moments, as consciousness returns and awareness expands, there might be some sense, however vague or fleeting of the Aristotelian insights that accompanied the descent into sleep, some memory of reflecting on virtue and character, on flourishing and the good life, on practical wisdom and friendship and contemplation, some feeling that these ideas matter, that they speak to something important about how to live, that they offer guidance worth following, not as rigid rules, but as gentle orientations, not as burdens, but as invitations, not as impossible ideals, but as achievable possibilities for ordinary human beings who want to live well, to find meaning and purpose, to flourish in the deep sense that Aristotle describes. The transition from sleep to waking is gradual, gentle, as consciousness slowly expands, and the body begins to move, and the room comes into focus, and the day's tasks begin to present themselves to awareness. There is no need to rush this transition, no urgency about leaping into action, but rather an opportunity to ease into waking, to notice how the body feels after a night of rest, to observe the quality of mind and mood, to take a few breaths and allow yourself to arrive fully in the present moment before beginning the day's activities. This gentle transition is itself a kind of practice, a small exercise of practical wisdom, recognizing what is needed here, honoring the body's rhythms, not forcing or rushing, but allowing the natural process of waking to unfold at its own pace. And as you fully wake and begin to consider the day ahead, you might bring to this consideration some of the Aristotelian insights that were present at the edge of sleep, not as explicit thoughts necessarily, but as a kind of background awareness, a sense of what matters and why, a recognition that today offers opportunities for the practice of virtue, for the exercise of practical wisdom, for the maintenance of friendship, for the pursuit of understanding, for the small choices and actions that gradually form character and contribute to flourishing. You need not feel burdened by this or anxious about living up to some ideal, but can simply notice that the day ahead is not just a series of tasks to be completed or problems to be solved, but an opportunity to live well, to be the kind of person you aspire to be, to exercise your capacities as a rational and social being, to move toward eudaimonia through the practice of virtue and the cultivation of wisdom. Perhaps you notice, as you prepare to begin the day, that you feel slightly different than you might have yesterday, slightly more oriented toward what truly matters, slightly more aware of the connection between your choices and your character, slightly more inclined to think about virtue and wisdom rather than just efficiency and productivity. This subtle shift, if it occurs, is not dramatic or revolutionary, but gentle and modest, the kind of small change that accumulates over time, that builds through repeated practice and reflection, that gradually transforms who we are and how we live without any single moment of dramatic conversion or radical transformation. This is the Aristotelian way, the slow formation of character through practice and habituation, the gradual development of virtue through repeated good actions, the patient cultivation of wisdom through experience and reflection, and while it is not exciting or dramatic, it is real and sustainable and leads to genuine and lasting flourishing. As the day truly begins, as you move through the morning's activities and engage with the world, you carry with you, perhaps unconsciously, the influence of last night's reflections on Aristotelian philosophy, on purpose and meaning, on virtue and character, on the good life. This influence need not be explicit or deliberate to have its effect, for it operates at the level of values and orientation, shaping what you notice and care about, inclining you towards certain ways of thinking and choosing, providing a framework for making sense of experience and finding meaning in the daily round of activities and interactions. And this gentle influence, sustained over time, reinforced through repeated reflection and practice, can gradually transform a life, can move you step by step toward the kind of flourishing Aristotle describes, can help you become through patient effort the kind of person who lives well naturally, who finds deep satisfaction in the exercise of virtue, who experiences the harmony of a character well formed and actions that express that character. This transformation is not something that happens all at once, or that can be achieved through a single decision or a burst of effort, but unfolds slowly over weeks and months and years, requires patience and persistence, involves setbacks and failures, and the need to keep practicing even when progress seems imperceptible, trusts that the slow work of character formation is worthwhile even when results are not immediately visible. Aristotle would encourage this patient persistence, this willingness to keep practicing virtue and exercising practical wisdom even when the path seems long and the goal distant. For he understood that flourishing is not a destination to be reached, but an ongoing activity to be engaged in. Not a final achievement, but a continuous process. Not something you have, but something you do, day after day, choice by choice, gradually becoming through this daily practice the kind of person whose character is excellent and whose life is meaningful. And so, as this exploration of Aristotelian philosophy on purpose and meaning comes to its close, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a gentle fading, a quiet ending that mirrors the gentle descent into sleep that began this long reflection, we return to where we started, to the recognition that ancient wisdom can speak to modern questions, that philosophical reflection can be a companion for rest rather than an obstacle to it, that thinking about purpose and meaning need not be anxious or urgent, but can be calm and patient, allowing ideas to settle and influence us slowly rather than demanding immediate transformation or certain answers. Aristotle's voice from across the centuries offers not commands or burdens, but invitations and possibilities, not impossible ideals, but achievable excellence, not distant perfection, but present flourishing, not rules to follow anxiously, but wisdom to guide us gently toward lives of virtue and meaning and deep satisfaction. May you carry something of this wisdom with you, not as explicit knowledge that you must remember and apply, but as a subtle influence on how you see and feel and choose, as a gentle orientation toward what truly matters, as a quiet confidence that the good life is possible, that flourishing is achievable, that purpose and meaning are found in the daily practice of virtue and the cultivation of wisdom and the maintenance of friendship and the exercise of our capacities as rational and social beings. May you trust the slow process of character formation, have patience with yourself and with the gradual nature of growth. Find satisfaction in small acts of virtue and moments of practical wisdom. Recognize that you are capable of excellence, of living well, of becoming through patient practice the kind of person who flourishes naturally and finds deep meaning in the simple activity of being fully human. And may you rest well, knowing that sleep is part of the good life, that rest is necessary for flourishing, that the body's need for restoration is not a weakness, but a natural rhythm to be honored, that caring for yourself includes allowing for sleep and recognizing that you cannot be virtuous or wise or engaged in meaningful activity without also resting and restoring yourself. Sleep deeply, rest fully, allow consciousness to dissolve, and the body to repair, and the mind to process and integrate, and wake tomorrow ready to continue the journey of becoming, to practice virtue and exercise wisdom, to live well in accordance with your nature, to move step by step toward the flourishing that Aristotle describes with such care and insight, and the quiet confidence that comes from deep understanding of what it means to be human and to live a good life. Let these thoughts fade now as sleep returns, or as waking consciousness fully arrives, whichever is appropriate for this moment, letting go of the need to hold or grasp or remember, trusting that something valuable has been encountered, that ancient wisdom has offered its gifts, that purpose and meaning have been illuminated even if not fully grasped, that the path toward flourishing has been marked even if every step is not yet visible. And in this letting go there is peace, there is rest, there is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that the good life is possible, and that each day offers new opportunities to move toward it, to practice virtue, to exercise wisdom, to be the kind of person who lives well and flourishes in the deep and complete sense that makes a human life truly meaningful and worth living. Rest now, or wake now, or simply be in this present moment, allowing these reflections to settle where they will, to influence as they may, to guide gently without forcing, to invite without demanding, to accompany without burdening. For this is the way of ancient wisdom, patient and enduring, speaking across centuries with a voice that does not shout or command, but whispers and suggests, and invites us to consider, to reflect, to imagine the possibility of living well. And in that quiet invitation there is everything we need, all the guidance and reassurance and wisdom required for the journey toward flourishing, toward eudaimonia, toward a life of virtue and meaning and deep human satisfaction. The words fade into silence. The voice grows quiet. The philosophical reflection gives way to simple presence, and in that silence and presence there is completion, not in the sense of having finished or achieved or mastered, but in the sense of having touched something true and valuable, having encountered wisdom that endures, having glimpsed the possibility of a well-lived life. And this is enough, more than enough, as we return to rest or rise to waking, carrying forward Aristotle's gentle guidance toward purpose and meaning and the flourishing that constitutes the highest human good.